Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast, our final episode of April, and we are definitely moving in the right direction from a weather standpoint here in Happy Valley. Feeling great around here. We've got a lot to talk about, including some recent big-time players that we had the pleasure of covering in Penn State uniforms, many of them before that at the high school level. 10 total players as of now are on 2024 NFL rosters as rookies from last year's Penn State class, or from last year's Penn State roster. We should note it's about 2 p.m. on Tuesday as we record. There's a couple other guys out there still looking for NFL homes officially right now from this draft class and rookie class. But we're going to get into it right now with Mark Brennan, Tyler Calvaruso, not just about what we saw take place Thursday through Saturday, from the draft standpoint, from the undrafted free agency standpoint, but also looking ahead 2025 and year after year now under James Franklin, we have seen big numbers in terms of draft classes. This was an 8-man class that matches the largest of the century for the Nittany Lions. They did that in 2022. And when you start to think about the talent that has accrued here on campus, guys that are stepping up to maybe star roles, guys that are stepping up to starter positions, and maybe even some of the guys who aren't going to start this year, what could they accomplish on the field? It could be another really big draft class. And before we get through this podcast, we will put a spotlight on some of those 2025 prospects to keep tabs on moving forward. We'll finish with some thoughts on the transfer portal, which remarkably is going to close here for the spring portal window on Tuesday. We could see still some names surface between now and Thursday as they show up in the portal, but really, as we've discussed continuously the last couple of weeks, kind of a sleepier transfer portal period than we expected. But without further ado, Mark Brennan, Tyler Calvaruso with us. Fellas, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, good to be here.
Yeah, always happy to be back, man. So we got a lot to cover today, so it's going to be fun.
That's right. Daniel Gowan currently in Paris as we record. He will be back in central Pennsylvania by nightfall Wednesday, though, I believe, or Thursday. So he'll be back in the fold pretty soon. We hope he had fun. We're going to be sending Mark Brennan on the vacation route next. He's off to the islands of Jamaica. So, hey, we hope you have fun, Mark, but we're going to pick your brain a lot. Same with you, Tyler Calvaruso. Work our way pick by pick through this draft class, get into some general thoughts about what happened for other guys who were not picked. And then, as I said, talk about some of the 2025 class potential. We'll begin at the top. Olu Fashanu, as anticipated, fellas, the first Penn State player to hear his name called. I'll put it out there first. Mark, congratulations. You won the mock draft that we worked our way through previewing last episode. Daniel was involved in that, but the three of us were kind of talking our way through it last week before the draft. Mark took first place. I was second. Tyler Calvaruso third. And our buddy Daniel goes from first to worst this time around, but I don't think he minded. He was away on vacation enjoying himself, as I said. So with that said, we were all pretty close in the right ballpark with Olu Fashanu. I think between 9 and 14. He goes number 11 overall to the New York Jets. Talking about his path to the draft a bit, Mark, he stepped up as his first start in the Outback Bowl, New Year's Day of 2022. By the end of that year, and quite frankly, by halfway through his first season as a starter, we were hearing about the first round buzz projections, all that different stuff. He stays on campus a year longer than a lot of people anticipated. He becomes an All-American at the consensus level. And here he is, the third offensive lineman off the board, heading to the New York Jets, where he will be tasked with replacing 40-year-old future Hall of Fame quarterback Aaron Rodgers in what is going to be a microscope kind of season with the attention they're going to have.
Yeah, and I'm a little ticked because I had him going number 10 to the Jets. And then the Jets, why would you make that trade? I mean, the Jets weren't going to take a quarterback, so they trade back one spot. Was it to the Vikings? Yeah. And the Vikings get J.J. McCarthy, and I'm one pick off. But, one thing I said, and it's weird because when you're at Pro Day, we could see those Jets scouts really taking a close look at Olu. Good for him. The guy checked all the boxes. You talk about his length, his athleticism, giving up 1 sack and 700 snaps or whatever it was. And I also think from a personality standpoint, the way he carried himself, he just checked every single box. And it's just good to see good things happen for him. I think he's going to be a guy who's able to go in there. And I know Tyler could talk more about team fit, but we had mentioned before the draft that they signed 2 33-year-old free agents or brought in 2 33-year-old tackles. And listen, I mean, you want to keep that quarterback healthy. Into his 40s, you're going to need somebody who's going to be there for a while. And Olu's obviously the guy. It was nice to see it work out well for him.
when you're a first round prospect, you're expected to go round one. They tend to have cameras in your face from all the networks. That was the case for Olu on Thursday night. And it was really cool to see a guy who has been so even keel from the time we first got to know him when he was down at Gonzaga high school, coming up the ranks, coming to the big man challenge here as a prospect, through when he was just kind of an emerging talent, a guy that like physically looked different, unique, to where he was a tangible NFL draft prospect. He was the same really throughout that process. And to see him have that moment with that phone call and get to just break out that big wide smile and beaming with pride around his family. And of course, James Franklin, who, as we'll get to in a moment, was 2 for 2 in seeing his first round pick selected in person. Tyler, as Mark said, you broke down NFL fits for these guys after they were picked to their respective teams. What do you see from the New York Jets, Olu Fashanu? And I'll put it out there, prior to you covering Penn State, you covered the New York Jets, so you have a pretty good feel for that franchise.
Yeah, I actually think it's a pretty good situation that he's walking into, because given the veterans that they brought in, Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses, he's not walking into a situation where, hey, you're Aaron Rodgers blindside from day one. Well, we're going to go and try out and win a Super Bowl in this extremely narrow window, given the age of Aaron Rodgers and, some of the personnel on this team and what they're trying to accomplish here in the short term. He's going to be able to learn from these veterans. I mean, he made it no secret on draft night that Tyron Smith is one of his idols. It's a guy that he watched growing up and really tried to learn from watching him on television. Now they're going to be sharing a position room. One thing I thought of this morning is too, this juncture with Smith, him being 33 years old and, being a guy who's dealt with injuries, he might not even be practicing a ton. Maintenance is such a big thing for him at this point in his career. The same can be said about Morgan Moses as well. So whether he's seeing game action right off the bat or not, Olu Fashanu is going to be developing behind the scenes quite nicely. He's going to be taking his fair share of reps against the ones. So from a development standpoint, I think he's in a good spot. The Jets, their history developing first-round picks is what it is. They're not too far removed from Mekhi Becton essentially flopping in New York. So they're hoping for a little bit better of an outcome here. Obviously a different staff. Keith Carr is the O-line coach in New York. So they're hoping for some pretty positive results here with Olu. From a scheme fit perspective, the Jets, they pretty much, since Robert Saleh got to New York, they've run that outside zone run concept, which is what a lot of NFL teams do now. So that's something Penn State, orchestrated last season. So that's something where there's going to be comfort. And I mean, the Jets, I think that they anticipate him being a potential high-level pass protector. We saw it throughout his career at Penn State. That's what they're going to be looking for out of him on the blind side. So I think it's a pretty solid spot here. Again, he's not walking into a situation where it's going to be an immediate pressure cooker. He's going to be able to learn. He's going to be able to develop. And if he is, required to play as a rookie, I think he's going to be in a position to succeed.
Now, it's one thing to take a big jump in football and reach that dream and achieve that goal, and you try to last in the NFL as long as you can, each one of these rookies. It's another, the financial impact that it makes on the lives of a 21-year-old like Olu Fashanu, on his family, on his future family, on his future family's future family. I mean, it goes generational wealth when you're talking about the ability to get this rookie deal at this high on the board and then pursue a second contract to build off of it. Mark, you broke down the numbers for a piece that you do every draft weekend. I think it's one of the more interesting ones and kind of perspective reminding ones that I read coming out of the draft regarding Penn State guys. Because again, we've been hearing them talk about these dreams since they were 16, 17 years old. The people who've been with them and their supporting cast and their families have heard since they were 7, 8, 9 years old, probably. But before NIL, you really had to be patient to get that payday. That's changed a little bit for guys like Olu, guys like Chop Robinson. They've already got some nice windfall from their talents financially, but this is a game changer. Can you read us off what Olu's looking at as being the number 11 overall pick?
Yeah, just for some perspective, back in 1995 when Kerry Collins was the number 5 pick, he had a $7 million signing bonus. That was before the current pay scale was in place. I always remember talking to Kerry after that draft and saying, how do you get that? What do they do? He goes, they actually write you a check for $7 million. I said, that had to be like mind blowing. He goes, yeah, you could not even believe it. But, $7 million today, I just looked it up, in 1995 would be worth $14 million now. And the reason I mention that is because when you look at Olu's deal, things are much different now than back in the Wild West before they had the rookie pay scale. So he'll sign a deal for 4 years, about $21 million with about $12 million as a signing bonus. So a huge amount of money, but not what it might have been, 20, however many years ago before the pay scale. So the reason we know what these numbers are, and you go to spotrac.com to check them all out, is because that pay scale, there's really not much flexibility in what these guys are going to get. The big difference with the early round picks compared to the late picks, and we'll get into this as we go through, is that signing bonus. Typically, that's going to be, especially later in the draft, the only guaranteed money for any of these prospects. So when you look at Olu going number 11, 21 million, 11 or about 12 million guaranteed, that's a huge percentage that he's getting up front. So he's going to be taken care of for life, and good for him. I always say that when it comes to covering the drafts, now I can become a fan. I don't know about you guys, but now I'm a fan of Olu, and I hope all these guys are able to, make a lot of money on this first deal. And then some of them who went later, maybe you're not going to get it till your second deal.
Yeah, and just to kind of follow up on what you said there, in terms of some of these paydays and everything, you're looking at this board and you're working your way through it, and you're talking about that guaranteed money and the difference between a round 1 guy and even a round 3 or round 4 guy. But to me, the biggest, most advantageous thing about getting that rookie deal on a first round status contract is getting that 5th-year option, because it gives you and the franchise some protection. We've seen it work out for a lot of guys. It kind of bridged the gap for Saquon Barkley to get his franchise deal, which bridged the gap to get his bigger deal with the Philadelphia Eagles. And now you're in a situation where just today, before we sat down to record, we used to call him Jason Odafe-Oweh, has gotten his 5th-year option picked up by the Baltimore Ravens. So not only does that give him a security for what's going on right now in year 4 of 2024, but he's got $13 million coming his way in 2025 from that option. So if you can kind of be on path, and Jason Odafe-Oweh has not had his big breakout yet, but he's shown flashes. So even if you just show the commitment is worth maintaining for the franchise, that option year, rather than being forced into an unrestricted free agency situation as a 2nd rounder or a 3rd rounder, can really make a big difference on your bank account, make a difference on your ability to make more money down the road. So that's big here. And Chop Robinson also in that same boat. While Olu Fashanu is the first Penn State offensive lineman to go in round 1 since 2007, him and Chop Robinson form only the 2nd multiplayer first-round class from Penn State since 2003. So a significant span there. And Chop Robinson, we thought maybe he'd have to sweat it out a little bit toward the end of round 1. Didn't work out that way. 21st overall pick, so a lot of cushion between him and round 2. The Miami Dolphins grab him. Mike McDaniel, their general manager, raved about what he's going to bring to their franchise and his ability to get after the passer. It sounds like that's obviously number 1 on the priority list for him, and then he's going to work his way into be more a well-rounded defender at the NFL level, and within this defense could play a lot out of a stand-up position. What did you make out of this as you talked fit and wrote about the fit between Chop Robinson and the Miami Dolphins, who had a bit of an exodus from last year's team on the defensive side of the ball from a coaching perspective and a player perspective?
I think this is probably my favorite fit of any spot that a Penn State player landed, because if you look at what the Dolphins are doing defensively now with Anthony Weaver replacing Vic Fangio as defensive coordinator, he's coming over from Baltimore where – you saw more of that wide 9 defensive front where you could get a pass rusher really isolated on a tackle. You allow him to get upfield and get after the quarterback and set the edge in the run. And really, yeah, exactly. And that caters exactly. That caters with the Chop Robinson skill set perfectly in my eyes. And also the other big thing here for me, at least the way I see it, is Dolphins aren't going to be asking Chop Robinson as a rookie to be doing things he's not comfortable doing because of the personnel they already have on the defensive line. Bradley Chubb's a veteran. Jalen Phillips is coming off a pretty significant Achilles injury, but when he's on, he's as good as any edge rusher in the league. They signed Shaq Barrett in free agency. There's a potential mentor for Chop Robinson. So, they're not going to be sending Robinson out there to stop the run and be this run stopper and ask him to do things that he's not, because they already have guys in the building who have proven for 5-10 years that they can do exactly that. So, again, another situation where players are going to be able to develop hone his skills, and take the field and be in positions to succeed early in his career. So I just think all of that combined, this is probably, for me, my favorite fit of any Penn State player at the next level. I think Chop Robinson has the ability and the potential to do some pretty special things for the Dolphins. I think he gives some of these AFC quarterbacks some problems. We might see him going up against Olu quite often.
Yeah, and maybe Caden Wallace too, as we'll get to in a moment. But with Chop Robinson, who came over from Maryland after being more of a hybrid guy, linebacker in play. He was a 5-star prospect out of Maryland. And, of course, this was a guy Penn State wanted badly at the high school level. I remember him being here at a camp and working closely with then camp counselor Micah Parsons. And now he comes here 2 years later. He's a first-round pick at a different position entirely. And Mark, this is an exciting one because, one, it's a tremendous thing to sell to draft. I mean, they did it with Arnold Ebiketie. He was here for 1 year, different story. Former 2-star recruit who went to Temple, ends up being a fringe first-round guy, goes high second round. Now you've got Chop Robinson, who made the move from another Big Ten program to a higher-level Big Ten program, ends up waiting a year to be a starter. Only played 10 games out of 13 because he was not in the bowl game, and he missed a couple coming off the Ohio State matchup. As a result, production's dinged a little bit. There's some holes to poke through that during the draft scrutiny. 4 sacks, 7.5 tackles for loss. But at the end of the day, the NFL Combine performance, his trajectory as an edge rusher, and what Tyler just referenced, kind of that versatility in terms of position, depending on what a scheme's going to look like, it all adds up to him comfortably being inside the first round. So 2 questions here for you. 1, how much is he getting paid to be a Miami Dolphin? And 2, what did you think about James Franklin running the gauntlet through the traffic and everything else you got to deal with down there in Maryland, going from Olu Fashanu's living room to just in the nick of time? Couldn't have really afforded to hit another red light for Chop Robinson's pick as a Miami Dolphin, and he ends up being the first one to greet him after that pick. Of course, it gets showcased in about a 4-minute package produced by Penn State. I thought it was phenomenal.
Yeah,
that's one they should be putting out there and making sure everybody sees, all the moms and dads out there of every prospect that they're interested in. So what do you think of James Franklin's efforts on draft night, and what is Chop Robinson getting paid here financially?
He didn't even knock on the door. I mean, that's the thing that frightened me a little bit. James Franklin just running in people's houses. He doesn't care. I'm here. I'm coming in. No, it definitely was cool, and it's nice to see that. They put in that effort. We see him, take the helicopter or do all these things in recruiting. It's nice to see it on the other end that, these weren't just slabs of meat who were playing for you. These are guys that he cares about. And I think you can see with the reactions with the families that they genuinely care for one another with respect to how much Chop is going to make. You remember what Abdul Carter told us after the blue-white game? About why he said, it's like why he wanted to go from linebacker to defensive end. And, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's about, it's more a natural thing to me. I could play without thinking too much and I'm going to get paid, and that's Chop Robinson is getting paid. So 4 years, about $15 million, half of that in a signing bonus. So you're looking at $7.5 million signing bonus. Wow. And from this point on, you start to see the signing bonuses really drop. And that's why it was like weird last year when Joey Porter Jr. was the first pick of that second round. He actually lost a significant amount of money not going in that first round because the signing bonus actually dropped. So
and the 5th-year option.
Yeah. So it's for Chop to come to Penn State. And I think you touched on this, do what he was able to do, change positions, and it worked out this well for him. I think that should bode well for them moving forward in the portal. Maybe not this particular year because it doesn't look like there's a ton of action. I know we're going to get to that a little later, but just in terms of watching, you talked about AK, watching some of these guys come here for a limited amount of time and be able to make the most of it.
Yeah, another feather in the cap for Manny Diaz, who's moved on, but obviously he's got a lot to be proud of with what Chop Robinson
now
did.
Deion Barnes.
And then that's where I was going to go next. Deion Barnes, who's starting to rack them up as a coach and as a recruiter right now. And by the way, we missed the kudos, but we got a few other guys to get to for him. Phil Troutwine had himself a hell of a draft, and we'll talk about that coming up momentarily. Let's get to the next guy here on the board. Second round pick. I'm sorry. There was no round 2 pick. That was the only round we didn't see a Penn State player selected. We had to wait a little while on Friday night. And he wasn't the betting favorite to be the third Nittany Lion off the board. That's not how we wrote it up, but kudos to Caden Wallace, who we had on this show a couple months into his draft process, hearing about his introspective thoughts and how he finished his Penn State career. Someone who made 40 starts. I know not all of them, he wasn't proud of the finished product, but in that senior season, that extra senior season, he really racked up a lot of compelling starts for NFL films to break down. In the postseason, he went to the Shrine Bowl. He ended up starting at right guard. He practiced at left tackle and right tackle. He got a lot of really positive feedback and meetings from NFL teams from that experience. And I said that it was an extra senior season for him. He didn't have an extra senior season. He was a fifth-year senior. It just felt like he was around here for so long because he cracked the lineup as a starter in 2020. So, Mark, before we get to you and the financial results for Mr. Wallace, what do we think about this matchup? Because this is a rebuilding New England Patriots roster, Tyler Calvaruso, and now Caden Wallace joins it. Bill Belichick era is over, and he ends up being one of the first picks of this new era for the Patriots. And, of course, Coach Mayo has a lot of familiarity with that franchise, being a former player, but obviously someone they see worthy of an investment pretty early at pick number 68. This was not a late third-round pick. This was an early third-round pick.
Yeah, the pick caught me off guard a little bit, not because of Caden Wallace, because I had him pegged as a third-rounder when we did our mock, but I thought if the Patriots were going to go tackle, based on their needs, I thought they might go with a little bit more of a pure left tackle as opposed to a guy who played on the right side during his college career. But the big thing with Wallace is he's got versatility to his game. And Elliot Wolf, who works in the Patriots front office, discussed this following the pick. If he's got to slide over to the left, they think he could do that. They think if he has to kick inside, he can do that too. So as a talent, I think it's a good fit for the Patriots because, again, the zone blocking run scheme, that's something that Wallace will be playing in New England, something he's already comfortable with, so that works. And, whether he kicks inside or stays at tackle, he's in a position to give the Patriots some value. I'm not quite sure what they're going to wind up doing with him when it's all said and done. Again, the need is at left tackle predominantly for them. So maybe he winds up giving that a go as a rookie, and then they go from there, see how he takes to it. Because, there are little nuances that go from playing right tackle to left tackle, but it's a move that he should be able to make. Again, you mentioned it. It's a position that he has worked out at leading up to the draft. So it's not like it's a foreign concept to him. But we'll see what exactly New England wants to do with Caden Wallace. But I think they got themselves a pretty good offensive lineman to add into the depth chart as a rookie.
Well, it seems like what we're hearing out of New England up there in Massachusetts is that the intention is to utilize him on the left side.
Yeah.
And so, hey, you want to talk about a position where you can really cash in long term? That's one that'll do you really well. Left offensive tackle. It's worked out really well for Donovan Smith, former Penn Stater, with multiple NFL franchises on his way to multiple Super Bowl victories. So that was the second player off the board at the offensive tackle position for Penn State. As we said, big night for Phil Trautwein. It wasn't done yet. Mark, before we get into those financial ramifications for Caden Wallace, you and I both spent a lot of time watching him develop, going back to his high school career. I think we were both in New York Jets facilities when he was a rising senior and a guy that was high on Penn State's target board. He changed his body a lot during his time on campus. But the one thing that he changed based on the accolades he got as a senior from the coaching staff and his teammates was just kind of his attitude and his consistency and the priorities, however they stacked up for him in his fifth and final year on campus. They led to a very rewarding result on draft night. What do you think about the career arc of Caden Wallace, a former top 100 overall recruit from the Hun School in Princeton, and ultimately, what is he getting from in terms of a payday?
He, to me, there a lot of guys come into Penn State and things don't work out necessarily as they expected right off the bat. And I think Caden Wallace is a great example of that. We had heard from the beginning just what an unbelievable physical talent he was, and he could just never put it together. The thing that really stuck out to me, and it started when we were out at the Rose Bowl, and you were talking to him. I know I was there as well. He was as self-aware as a player in that position as anybody I could remember. Now, yeah, there have been guys who've been self-aware, have been really good throughout their whole career, but he minced no words about where he thought he had to get better. He knew he got it. And it's nice to see a young guy kind of understand that, in an era, and I hate to be get off my lawn guy, but in an era when things don't go well for some young folks, especially football players, they blame everybody else. They hit the transfer portal and let's see if it could work out, better somewhere else. Not this kid. It's like, okay, this is what I need to do to get better. And he did it. And it was so cool to see. So to me, those are the kind of people that, again, now once he's out of the program, very easy to root for. Just really self-aware. With respect to money, I think there's an interesting twist here in that this was the one guy who we all projected going later than he actually went. All four of us, and significantly so. Not significantly, about 30, 40 picks. But we all picked him like right around 100. I think the average was 104, and he went at 68. So his contract will be 4 years, $6 million, $1.2 million signing bonus. By going that much earlier, he made himself about an extra $1 million on that contract. So I'm happy to be wrong with respect to him making what he was making. Now, we were wrong in a different way on another prospect who ended up it ended up costing him a lot of money. That was too bad to see. But with Caden Wallace, yeah, he's going to do really well for himself.
Yeah, Caden Wallace is a guy who really benefited himself for some of the postseason showcase opportunities. Adiza Isaac turned heads at the Senior Bowl, and he ended up being the next Penn State player off the board. Round 3, pick 93. We talked about Odafe Owe. He's not going anywhere anytime soon with the Baltimore Ravens. Well, he's got an old friend coming to town, Adiza Isaac, at that 93rd overall pick. And look, this is a fun defense to envision Adiza in, isn't it, Tyler Calvaruso? We talked about what Owe has been able to accomplish there. We've talked about how the former Baltimore DC might impact the future of Chop Robinson down in Miami now. What do you think about this fit with the first NFL team for Adiza Isaac?
It was pretty fun to evaluate because if you look at it, the Ravens might have either one of or the most unique defensive schemes in football, especially when it comes to the defensive front and how they want to utilize their defensive end. The Ravens bring in guys who, specifically at defensive end, who could do a little bit of everything. Not guys who are maybe pigeonholed into being a specialist. They want guys who could, get after opposing quarterbacks, stop the run. That's what Adiza Isaac is. And, we always talk about Chop Robinson and his potential, but at this point, Adiza Isaac might be the more complete player, and that makes him a pretty good fit with the Ravens. It's going to be interesting to see how exactly he is utilized in year one, given Baltimore has a pretty deep stable of defensive ends that they can turn to. But, again, he's a defensive end who pretty much fits exactly what they want out of their players at that position. He could do a little bit of everything. That's what the Ravens want out of their defensive front. That's what Isaac's going to bring to the table.
We talk about becoming fans of these guys, Mark. I'm already, I want to go out and get a Baltimore Ravens hat to support Adiza Isaac because he had just we saw it firsthand. He's a guy who was on the verge of breaking out in 2021. We all thought he was going to be that next man up for the defense. It ends up being a lost year for him. He has an Achilles injury during the offseason. He doesn't play it down. He spends much of early 2022 working his way back. And really halfway through that season, it wasn't quite the Adiza Isaac that we thought we might see. By the end of that season and into the Rose Bowl, yeah, he was asserting himself as a guy that needed to be reckoned with. Decides to stay on campus for a 5th year, capitalized on it. I thought he was the team's defensive MVP when we had our votes coming out of the regular season. I just thought he was the most consistent performer in terms of his production being spread out. There was a lot of production. He led the team in sacks. He led the team in tackles for loss. And not to mention his family life, what he's done to try to support his mother and how proud he is to be able to do that now. And we'll talk about why he's going to be able to do that a little bit because he's got some money coming his way. But Adiza Isaac with developmental disabilities among his siblings has really been raised in an environment that a lot of us just can't even wrap our minds around. So to come out of that, deal with what you dealt with as an athlete here on a college campus and to come out the other side as a day 2 pick. And I was hoping we'd see him go earlier. I thought we'd see him go earlier, Mark, but I think long-term, he could really benefit from sliding to a team that is ready to take care of him. This is a head coach who's been there for a long time. The people in this Baltimore Ravens front office have been there for a long time. They tend to be one of those organizations that rewards their employees, including the players. And I think this could be a really good fit for him if he continues to build and build and build like we've seen.
Yeah, you talk about a level of maturity out of a player, what he's I don't even want to say what he's had to deal with, because that's painting it in the wrong way. The way he has embraced the situation he's been in with his family, and the way he's been there for them and they've been there for him, I think is just tremendous. We've been around his family just a little bit, like at picture days and seeing them at games and whatnot, and just to see the interactions has been tremendous. I really wonder if he hadn't had that Achilles injury, if he might not have gone even earlier. Maybe there's some lingering concerns, but I'm with you. I think, you're going to the Ravens. I mean, that's like a for lack of a better way of putting it, a blue blood program. It's just become a really stable, and especially when you look at what they do defensively. So Adisa, in terms of contract, all these are for 4 years, obviously. $5.6 million, $927,000 signing bonus. So he's doing well for himself. And again, as we get lower and lower on this list, that signing bonus, like for a guy like Adisa, he's going to make that roster. There's no question about it. As we get a little bit lower, there's going to be question marks about whether guys can make rosters, and that's where Adisa is not going to have to worry money wise, because I think he's going to be in for that entire contract and do well for himself.
Yeah, I think it's going to prove to be a win for both sides of that pick. Lower than we anticipated. The same can be said for Theo Johnson, who ended up falling into day 3 of the draft very early on, one of the first picks off the board in round 4. But we kind of had, I think Daniel had a round 2 projection. A lot of us were early round 3. He ended up going pick 107. And you want to talk about fit, though, and kind of looking beyond the initial payoff of where you're slotted, where you're picked, what it means for your first rookie contract. I just think going to the New York Giants, how this offense is currently constructed, the way Daniel Jones tends to distribute the football, positional need. As far as I know, Darren Waller has not determined whether he's playing football or not in 2024. He's a former All-Pro tight end that the Giants traded for last year. But the New York Giants, bringing him in round 4, I see a lot of value there for New York. And I see for Theo Johnson an opportunity to step up and produce in year 1. And this is an offense that, let's face it, maybe extending all the way up to the head coach of the staff, Tyler, where if it doesn't work out, there could be a reset button push next year. But Theo Johnson, regardless of what happens with the rest of the offense, can really establish himself, because I think the snaps he might be able to get as an NFL-ready rookie at the tight end position, and then move forward into year 2 from there.
Yeah, I could see him being a productive member of that offense in year 1. It's a lot of it for me is going to come down to Darren Waller and his future. And I don't think anyone knows what's going on with Darren Waller but Darren Waller. So whether he suits up or not for the Giants in 2024, the fact of the matter is this is not 2020. He is no longer the Pro Bowl talent who is hauling in 100 passes a year and really dominating for the Raiders. He's just not that player anymore. So that opens the door for Johnson to come in and make an impact right off the bat. I anticipate the Giants would probably utilize Johnson similarly to Waller, in the sense that he would function more as a guy who splits out wide and plays a little bit bigger of a slot receiver role, function as a big target for Daniel Jones in the slot. Now, if Waller is on the field playing for the Giants in 2024 and the Giants turn to 2 tight end sets, that's where it gets a little bit dicey, because Johnson would have to play more in line. That it's something he can do. It's not necessarily his biggest strength as a tight end. That might be something that suits Daniel Bellinger a little bit better right now. But again, I think Johnson's going to be on the field plenty for the Giants in 2024. I think Joe Shea and Brian Daboll know they needed to get Daniel Jones some weapons. 1, to see what they had in Daniel Jones, and 2, to just raise the overall ceiling of the offense, especially after losing Saquon Barkley to the Eagles. So this is another pick I really like from, the Penn State perspective and the fit perspective. I think Johnson's walking into a situation where he could definitely be a guy who factors into that passing attack for the Giants pretty heavily as a rookie.
Let's go to our resident Eagles fan here on the podcast and talk about this, because you work your way into the red zone. You're going to start to eye up Theo Johnson if you're the Philadelphia Eagles or anybody else that's going to be facing this Penn State team. And you see a 6'6", 260-pound tight end who has proven here at Penn State when he can get vertical with the football and the offense can set him up to get the ball in space, he can do some things with it. Averaged almost 17 yards per reception as a junior. He had a big play in the Rose Bowl to cap off that year. And I think he had 5 or 6 consecutive games that season where he went 17+ yards and a reception. So I think he felt like people viewed his measurements, Mark, and talking to him at Pro Day, and kind of pegged him as that, classic Y tight end, a guy who maybe he's going to bring that versatility. And I thought that through his route work that day and maybe through some of the testing and the 40-yard dash numbers that he was going to work his way up this board. But this was a sluggish draft for the tight end position. Brock Bowers went first round as we expected, and then it was kind of a long and sporadic wait for the next guys to come off the board. And ultimately, Theo Johnson last into round 4. But it feels like because of his potential usage, because this offense does need playmakers in the passing game, let's be frank, there is a potential for him to outplay that round status based on usage in year 1.
Yeah, sometimes you're just stung by what teams need and don't need in a particular draft. And if you look at it, I mean, this stat kind of blew my mind a little bit, but he was the 5th tight end taken with the, what was it? 7th pick. Yeah, 7th pick of the 4th round. Last year, Brenton Strange was the 6th tight end taken, and he went number 61 overall in the 2nd round. Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, go figure. I mean, that's it, but it just goes, it's just dumb luck. It's like, who needs what in a given year? And then how often do we see it in this draft when there started to be a run on a certain position, and then it's like, okay, there's a run on running backs, then running back, or cornerback. So there just never was that run on tight ends. And I think, financially, I don't know that you can say it's really hurting him, because he'll sign for 4 years, $4.8 million. But compare that to Brenton Strange, again, who was the 6th tight end, and he was 4 years, $6.1 million. So that's where this really hits the pocketbook. $839,000 signing bonus compared to Strange got $1.4 million. So those are real figures, and it's just, again, just the way the draft kind of plays out. The other thing I would say about all these tight ends for Penn State the last couple of years, and Tyler Warren, the production they've had with all these tight ends playing and being productive, I think has been pretty cool to see. And I think it just goes to show that you can walk into a situation like that where maybe you're not going to be the tight end who's getting all of the focus, and it still could pay off for you in the long run in the NFL draft. I think we're starting to see that with the way they're just cranking these tight ends out. But he very easily could have been what would have been the 4th straight Penn State tight end to go in the 2nd round, and it's just the way the dice kind of fell this time.
Yeah, you got Gesicki now with the Cincinnati Bengals, Pat Freiermuth with the Steelers, and then Brenton Strange with the Jacksonville Jaguars preceding him as round 2 picks. We'll talk soon on this episode about how Tyler Warren might add to that equation in 2025. But moving on to the next man on the list here, Hunter Nourzad, someone who began his career without Power 5 offers on the table, had Ivy League opportunities, came out of the state of Georgia, went up to Cornell, ends up being an all Ivy League tackle for them. You've got COVID happening in the process in between many of those starts, but logs 20 starts at the tackle position at the Ivy League, decides he's good enough, he's good enough to maybe try his hand at the Power 5 level, enters the portal. Penn State's among the many teams that pursue him. He comes here last year following the departure, or I shouldn't say last year, 2 years ago, following the injury of Landon Tengwall in 2022. He emerges as the left guard. That he was a rotational kind of approach between those two guys. And then last year, after Juice Scruggs leaves as a 2nd-round pick at center, he's the center for Drew Aller, starting quarterback in year 1. So a lot of responsibilities on the plate of Hunter Nourzad. He ends up getting a 2nd-team nod among all conference players at the center position. And tell me what you think about what he brings to the Chiefs, team that clearly identifies he is a tangible, or he's a realistic option across the interior. Hunter said himself he doesn't really foresee tackle in his future anymore after playing at the Ivy League level. But this is a team that can afford some luxury picks, but needs to fortify depth in a relatively cheap way because of how they're paying guys at the top of the roster. He joins a quest for a three-peat. How can he help, Tyler?
I think it's more of a long-term play in the sense that the Chiefs are very strong up the middle right now. But, starting next year, moving forward 2 years down the road, they're going to have some decisions to make with their current personnel. And I'm not quite sure they're going to be able to keep all these guys, given some of the names we're talking about, the Joe Thuneys, the Creed Humphreys. These guys are going to command a lot of money because they're really good players. How many of these guys are Kansas City realistically going to be able to keep around? That's where Hunter Nourzad factors into the equation. Not only is he, ability to provide an instant upgrade in terms of depth up the middle on the interior at center, wherever the Chiefs deem him a fit. But long term, I think they're looking at a guy who maybe step in as a starter down the road. And it comes back to the traits that we discussed leading up to the draft, that high football IQ, that toughness that he plays with, that willingness to do whatever he needs to do on the offensive line in terms of the position he's playing, left guard, right guard, center. He's going to line up. He's going to give you his best rep possible. Those are all things that have seemingly appealed to Kansas City in this situation. So maybe you don't see Nourzad in year one on the field. Injuries always pop up in the trenches, so it always helps to have a high-quality player like him on board right off the bat if needed. But long-term, I don't think it's crazy to think Hunter Nourzad could be a starter for a team that has designs on competing for Super Bowl every single season.
And Patrick Mahomes, correct me if I'm wrong, he's still 28 years old. I mean, he's got a long way to go. So if you were to tap in as his center, it could be a hell of a partnership for a long time. I mean, and he brings a lot. I think the versatility to step in at guard potentially. I mean, this is a fun thing for Hunter Nourzad to all of a sudden step onto the bandwagon here with Kansas City. No team has ever won 3 consecutive Super Bowl championships. They're trying to be the first. He is going to be, in his own way, a part of that process starting now. Mark, this was a guy I'm working on putting together a list for Lions 24/7 within the next few days, ranking the top 10 transfer portal pickups for Penn State of this era, which it goes back to 2018, I believe. Nourzad's earned himself pretty high regard, a lot of clout on that list because of what he did to fortify a dicey situation in 2022 on the way to an 11-win season in year one with the program. Remember, he didn't enroll until that summer. He wasn't a January enrollee. He graduated from the Ivy League, got to campus in the summer. And then last year, you talk about stepping in seamlessly for Juice Scruggs. Yes, there were some rough moments for the offense, but no one that we've spoken to is applying any of that onto the shoulders of Hunter Nourzad, who, again, was a second-team all-conference guy. He was the highest-graded run blocker on this team, according to PFF, and I think one of the most highly regarded players on either side of the ball if you took a poll of players in that locker room last year.
Yeah, one of their stronger players, too. And I think, you're looking at somebody that, I guess if I'm thinking about the top 10, that's a sneaky good pick to kind of put in there. But I think the thing that you touched on, Tyler, the ability to pick up playing center. I mean, you mentioned it. At Cornell, he played tackle. So, moving from tackle to guard maybe isn't that big of a deal. But then, you're only a guard for 1 year and then moving in and playing center. And as many things are going on there, that could not have been the easiest thing. Obviously, the kid came from the Ivy League, so he's intelligent. But it's not just about your IQ at that thing. I mean, there's people coming at you. You're making line calls and all these things. And let's go back to Phil Troutwine, in the job he did. And, remember, what was it, like 3 years ago or after his first year or two, people were kind of down on him. And, he's really turned everything around. And you look at this draft and you look at what they were able to do last year with Juice going out. I mean, some good things happening on that offensive line. With respect to the financial end of it with Hunter Nourzad, this is where, you're looking at a 5th-round pick. He's going to really have to make this team. Mm-hmm. And this is where we're into that area where all of these contracts are worth in excess of $4 million, but you have to make the team to get that money. So for Hunter Nourzad, his deal is 4 years, $4.3 million, $314,000 of that is guaranteed. So he's in a pretty decent spot, making that $300K. But he still is a 5th-round pick. I don't know that it's an absolute – I hope he makes it, but this is where at the area where you're kind of scratching and clawing. And, yeah, if you make it, then you're going to get that first-year salary and things are looking really good for you. And maybe that gives you that much more motivation. But from here on out, it's going to be really tricky for some of these guys.
Like everybody else in the league, you've got to earn that contract 4 consecutive years too. Nothing
right.
Guaranteed about what Hunter Nourzad is getting.
And that's why.
Hold on, unless you're a quarterback or an edge rusher, then you might get everything
right.
guaranteed to you at this point in the NFL. But I think Hunter Nourzad finds himself in a good spot to continue to develop because, I mean, again, this is a big jump from one spot to the next, and he really showed what he could do. And I think if Andy Reid is taking you and taking you onto that roster right now, it says a lot about where you are to IQ level too. And we've heard so much about Hunter Nourzad in that regard. Guys, let's jump into round 6. And actually, before we do that, I did want to mention Troutwine one more time because here's what he has done. He came to Penn State, remember, in 2020, hired from Boston College. He produced a first-round pick there, put a bunch of guys in the all-ACC team there. But he came to campus and couldn't actually coach a practice with pads until October of 2020 because of COVID. And so since then, here's what the deal has been with NFL draft picks produced. You've got in 2021, Michael Menet, the center, went in round 7. He's not in the league right now. You had Will Fries go in the 7th round. He had 17 starts in 2023. He started every game last year for the Indianapolis Colts. Moving forward, you had Rasheed Walker as a 7th round pick in 2023. That was a guy that a lot of us thought could be a first-round pick early in his career. Well, he's starting to look like that again. Maybe the left tackle of the future for the Green Bay Packers franchise. He started 15 games for the Packers last year on their way to the playoffs. And then you've got more recently Juice Scruggs, round 2 pick last year. He started 6 games as a rookie for the Houston Texans. And then in this draft, Olu Fashanu in round 1, Caden Wallace in round 3, guys that could be starting tackles in the AFC East next year. And then you've got maybe more of a depth piece with a 2-time defending Super Bowl champions for Hunter Norzad. So think about the branches that have grown from that offensive line room into the NFL with Phil Trautwein as the guy overseeing it. And then remember what is also brewing. It's a younger room right now. There's a lot of that blue chip talent that we just don't know about, but a lot to like about the direction and what's already been accomplished for Phil Trautwein now. Now suddenly in year 5 with the Penn State football program. Round 6, I think this was probably a favorite pick for a lot of people because, we weren't sure he would get picked. I know we all thought he would and we predicted he would, but this has been an underdog story since the beginning at Penn State. It will continue with the Buffalo Bills. Daquan Hardy goes in round 6. Didn't even have to wait to sweat it out in round 7. Pick 219. And this is just a quick little anecdote that we picked up down in Georgia in late December leading up to the Peach Bowl. I had a chance to sit across from Daquan Hardy for a bit leading up to that Peach Bowl game. And by the way, he played a career-high 80-plus snaps in that game. We were talking about a lot of the guys on their way out of the program, either not playing at all or guys playing, for a quarter or for a half. Hardy did not leave the field against Ole Miss in what was a rough game for the defense overall, but he did not leave the field, 80-plus snaps that week. But going back to the original point of me heading down to Atlanta is Daquan Hardy saying, he was initially silently committed to Buffalo. That was his plan to end up with the Buffalo Buffalo program, where, by the way, Andy Kotelnicki was on the staff at the time, now the offensive coordinator for Penn State. And he was he had MAC schools. He didn't have Power 5 offers. He made a visit late to Penn State right before that February signing day, went home, didn't have a scholarship offer in hand, figured, well, that's it. I'm going to sign with Buffalo. That's going to be the end of it. Within 48 hours of signing day, things changed. Penn State welcomes him on board, part of that 2019 recruiting class. Remember, other guys got on the field earlier at cornerback. You had Keaton Ellis and Marquise Wilson bring red shirt. You had Joey Porter Jr. in that class emerging as a national star. And oh, by the way, there was Daquan Hardy along the way. And at the other end of it, he proves to not only be a valuable asset, a guy who was a 4-year contributor at the nickel position, but really stepped up on the perimeter last year, was a heart and soul kind of impact player for this defense throughout the 2023 season, and then turns into this phenom as a punt returner, ends up top 10 nationally in punt return average, and kind of takes over that position by storm during the second half of his final season on campus. So Tyler equates to him being a 6th-round pick for a team that has Super Bowl contention aspirations for the Buffalo Bills. And I've got to imagine that special teams threat that he brings to the table tremendously boosted his draft stock. And otherwise, we may not be talking about him landing on NFL roster, otherwise via free agency.
Yeah, I think returner is where Hardy's going to make his money, at least with the Bills. Because if you look at his fit from a defensive scheme perspective, the Bills don't see him as an outside guy, and he's not necessarily the type that Sean McDermott trots out there in nickel in terms of measurables. Maybe he could work his way into a dime package role. We'll see how he does in training camp. But I think on special teams as a returner is where Hardy's going to have the chance to make most of his impact in the league. He's just so dynamic with the ball in his hands, as we saw at times last season. And, those new kickoff rules definitely help him a little bit in this regard as well. So whether it be returning kicks, returning punts, I think Hardy's definitely going to have a chance to make an impact with the Bills on special teams. And, who knows, maybe in those larger defensive back heavy packages, you see Hardy on the field.
Mark, as I said, he ends up in Buffalo after all. But instead of going and playing MAC football, he played Big Ten football, and he played a lot. Terry Smith loved this guy. James Franklin loved this guy. A lot of people on campus love Daquan Hardy. I think he's a guy that fans will probably hold in high esteem, especially because of how he finished his career in that Peach Bowl spotlight as well. When you look at what he earned from this opportunity, that's one thing. But how about just getting his foot on the door on an NFL roster as a rookie compared to, I think, the 5'8.5", 153-pound freshman who came to campus? He now 165 pounds or whatever he was by the time he really got in the field. But, I mean, Mark, this is a guy who's always going to be kind of have the physical measurements against him, except when he's running a 40-yard dash because he's very fast.
Yeah, he's a football player, right? And he's one of these guys. Bet against him at your own, at your own peril. We talked earlier. Don't get me wrong. I think Hunter Norzad has a good chance to make the Chiefs roster, but I just don't think it's a given. With Daquan Hardy, I think he does so many things, and I get that maybe he isn't a perfect fit to be a nickel corner, but I think his versatility, that if you absolutely needed him in an emergency to do whatever, he's the kind of guy who's going to be able to do it. So, good for him. He's looking at 4 years, $4.1 million. Now we're down to $121,000 signing bonus. So that's where now all of a sudden we're looking at those numbers. And if you don't make the roster, you're walking away with 120 grand, 121 grand in your pocket. I would not bet against him, just knowing what we know about that kid. And how cool was it for him to be able to parlay? They just decide to go with him at punt returner, and he makes that work. And I agree with you. I don't think this happens if that doesn't happen for him, because to me, I agree with Tyler Calvaruso. He's going to make his money in the NFL on special teams, and not only as a return guy. I mean, he's going to be a good gunner. He'll go out there and hold. He'll kick. I'll bet you if you wanted him to, he'll do whatever the hell you want him to do.
Yeah, and I think Franklin has mentioned before a few times that he knows he's going to be here now. How the hell wasn't Daquan Hardy returning punts earlier in his college career? He had him on campus for 5 years, and he knows that he'll hear that. But that was really a fun storyline to emerge, and it paid off for Daquan Hardy. And then on the different end of the pendulum, you want to think about when we were forecasting the 2024 draft last spring coming out of the 2023 draft. And if you were to tell any of us that Daquan Hardy was going to be selected ahead of Kalen King, and it was going to happen in round 6, that'd be a hard pill to swallow and understand. But that was indeed the reality that played out on Saturday. He was the 4th of 4 picks on day 3. Following Theo Johnson in round 4, and Hunter Norzad in round 5, Daquan Hardy in round 6, and just 3 picks before the conclusion of the draft overall, Kalen King finds a home with the Green Bay Packers, pick 255 in round 7. And Mark, I'm going to begin with you because you covered Kalen like I have throughout his career. He was somebody who was an absolute skyrocketer in our rankings at 24/7 Sports. I think he jumped about 200 spots in his final high school year. Big-time player out of Detroit. Terry Smith raved about him on signing day. James Franklin raved about him following his first few practices, and it was very much public by the time he was through his first spring practice in 2021 that he was going to have a role on the team. Earned a red shirt as a freshman. 2022, he ends up leading the Power 5 in all of Power 5 in pass breakups. He had a few interceptions. He had a dazzling interception in the Rose Bowl. And you and I are having real legitimate conversations with Daniel Gown on this podcast about whether we would take Kalen King or Joey Porter Jr. as the better cornerback at that point. And I was leaning toward Kalen King at that point. And I don't think I was alone.
No,
Porter,
me too.
Yeah, Porter goes pick number 32 last year. That's a second-round pick because the Miami Dolphins were docked their first-round pick, so kind of a weird thing, but he was round 2. And then Kalen King, who was so confident a year ago that he was going to break that spell and break that streak and be the first defensive back from Penn State. Remarkably, it has not happened to be a round 1 pick in the NFL draft. And instead, he's just a few picks away from falling out of the draft altogether. Tough 40 time at the combine, Mark. He had a really tough run at the Senior Bowl where he was one of the first juniors to participate out in the Senior Bowl. And obviously he opted out at the Peach Bowl. And when you kind of review the film from his senior year, just not the kind of highlights that we all anticipated for what was an overall very elite defensive unit. And so I think a lot of people saw where Penn State was as a defense, saw where Kalen King was as a starter, and figure, yeah, he's going to come out the other side and be a first-round pick. What do you make of what went down here? And you've covered probably 30 draft classes in Penn State. Is there any kind of story that is parallel? And I just want to put this out there. Getting Kalen King in the 7th round based on the football we have seen him play, the good football we have seen him play, is an all-time steal if it works out for Kalen King and the Green Bay Packers, because we saw this guy in 2022 specifically. I mean, even through the Rose Bowl without Joey Porter on the field, put on a show in some key moments when he was called upon and when he was really targeted.
Yeah, I don't recall this ever happening, somebody being projected as a first-round pick. I mean, you know, Hackenberg was projected at one point as going number 1 overall, but, you know, he went in the 2nd round. I mean, I still can't really wrap my head around it. I know that they put a lot of stock in the 40-yard dash. I still don't quite get why he would fall this far. I know some people have said he should have played in the bowl game. You know, hindsight's 2020. He probably should have, but I wasn't saying that before the game. You know what I mean? It would have given him an opportunity to play against another top 10 team. I think that would have maybe benefited him, but I don't think it was going to be, you know, result in him, you know, skyrocketing up. People had enough. He worked out at the combine. I mean, he worked out at pro day. He did things. So it wasn't as if they didn't have enough opportunity to see. In our predictions, you know, I think the consensus was, and I'm not going to go through what everybody said, but the consensus was that, okay, you know, his stock clearly slipped, but somebody's going to see the potential there and take a chance on this guy. And our average pick was 119. And instead, he 255. Yeah. And I'm sorry.
Is that round 5 then?
It was 4.
Round 4. Late round 4 then. Okay.
19th pick of the 4th round.
Okay. Wow.
So he ends up going essentially the last pick because those were compensatory picks, and they're all making exactly the same, those compensatory picks at the end of the draft. But had he gone at 119, and excuse me as I look away here, the guy who went at 119, Mason McCormick of South Dakota State, 4 years, $4.8 million with $800,000 signing bonus. Okay. Kalen King, 4 years, $4.1 million, $80,000 signing bonus. Now, I'm not turning my nose up at $80K. I don't make the big money like you guys, but I mean, $80,000, I have to imagine he's invested that much almost, you know, working out and preparing for the draft and doing whatever he was doing. So, you know, this sucks for him, you know, but I think I still believe that this is a guy, and I think it was one of the NFL network announcers, you know, said, hey, go out and do it. You can prove it. It's on you now. You can earn your spot. So if going so low wasn't enough of a motivator for him, financially, he has all the motivation in the world to go get after it. And I feel terrible for him because he was never anything but a classy kid with us, carried himself extremely well. Think was nothing but a team player. Didn't fault him for not playing in the bowl game because a lot of guys were opting out. So sucks for him, but we're talking about professionals now, and he's in a spot where he only has $80,000 guaranteed. And the impetus again is on him to go out and prove himself and prove that he's better than that, because I think he is.
And the key for Kalen, and maybe he's already past this point, will be to get to the point where you're not waking up and saying this sucks. That you start to go from, well, this sucks. That I'd imagine he knows how much first round picks get in their rookie deals, and he was maybe envisioning making that much by the time April 2024 came to a close. So that's a stark contrast in terms of financial reality. And even you think about any regret in sticking with Penn State, playing alongside your brother, who's a starting linebacker for a 4th season, and getting NIL money and then taking your shot at the NFL draft the next year. So there's a reason why he would wake up and feel maybe there's a cloud on top of him, but there's also a reason where you wake up and say, I'm on an NFL roster. I'm an NFL draft pick. I'm at square one like every other person, whether they're on draft the guy round one guy. You're going on the same field, and teams do make decisions calculated based on financial investment sometimes. If they got more money tied up long-term to a guy, he could stick on the roster easier than someone who doesn't have a lot of long-term money tied up. But Kalen King, I think that's the only way you can really view this. And it's easy for me to say as someone who's never been faced with anything close to this kind of a situation in terms of missing out on a financial opportunity and life-changing opportunity like that. But to get the chance now to go to Green Bay Packers facilities and just embrace that reality and not wake up every day and dwell, that's going to be the challenge. I think that's going to be the challenge for him. And the faster he can kind of sprint through what probably is a bit of a grieving process right now and bury that and bury the expectations he had and now look at the current reality, the better he'll be served. But again, everyone's going to deal with that kind of a psychological struggle, that kind of a psychological evolution in their own way, their own timeline. And you hope that he has the right people around him. And you hope that he checks into Green Bay Packers facilities where he'll say hello to his old teammate, Sean Clifford, and that he'll be ready to roll. And when he gets there, Tyler, what is he looking at in terms of a challenge to make this roster? And where do you think he could make a difference?
Hey, can I pitch in one question for Tyler too? While you're addressing that, do you think he would have been better off being an undrafted free agent to be able to pick and choose his spot? So as you analyze his fit with the Packers, could you have envisioned a situation where he might have even made more money as an undrafted free agent? So again, I just want to throw that at you, Tyler, as you're addressing this.
Yeah, again, I'm going to say psychologically, because I will say you talked about Kalen King and us covering him and him being really good to deal with. I'm going to extend that through Pro Day. And I asked him a couple of tough questions. I said, you told us last year that you were ready to be a first-round pick. You felt like that was in your future. It seems to us, following the forecast, that it maybe not in the cards anymore. And he really quickly was like, it's not about, to me, the first-round status anymore. It's about the second contract, my second NFL contract. So if he can truly keep that carrot at the end of the stick, then I think that it doesn't really matter about making maybe an extra $50,000 today. It matters about maybe psychologically that you were an NFL draft pick. I mean, does it matter to Kalen King that he's waking up and the team invested a pick on him versus waking up and saying, well, I have $50,000 more today, but I went undrafted. I didn't even get picked. I don't know. And I think that, it depending on how Kalen handles it, it could be a major difference. And I'll say the other question I asked him, have teams talk to you about safety? Because during the scouting combine that came up, and I know it's probably come up on the message boards, and it's maybe changed since his answer back then, maybe since he got the Green Bay Packers facility. But I said, has safety been a part of the discussions with teams as you look toward your future in the draft? And he said, no, I've never played the position. It's not something I'm talking about playing to this point with NFL teams. So just throwing that out there. Two questions that aren't easy to deal with being asked when you were supposed to be a first-round cornerback, being asked about not being a first-rounder, and being asked about maybe having to change positions to make it as a professional. But Mark, I think just to answer your question, again, easy for me to answer here in my chair in front of the computer. But I think there's something to be said about hearing your name called in that draft after a guy who had to wait as much as anybody in that draft to hear their name called because of his anticipation, I'd imagine. And I think psychologically it could make a little bit of a difference. And if that stacks up to you winning that last roster spot and then building from there and working your way to a 2 deep, maybe a starter, and then your second contract comes around and either the Packers got to pay up or somebody else in the market will pay up. And then that draft that happened 4 years ago is in the rearview mirror and you've got a whole different financial reality. That's got to be the goal for Kalen King. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. And I'll remove the psychologist spectacles now and talk about the fit here from a football perspective now with you, Mr. Calvaruso.
Yeah, from an on-field perspective, I do kind of get the sense he might have been better off going undrafted just because he would have been able to pick a situation where the fit is either more apparent or the cornerback depth chart is a little bit more barren and there's a little bit more of a opportunity or a clearer path to a spot on the 53-man roster coming out of training camp. Now, I will say this, Eric Stokes on the Packers, who I believe was a first rounder for them at some point. I forget what year he was picked. He hasn't been that great. So the Packers, they're looking for answers at corner. That's an opportunity for Kalen King. And I think he's going to have to make the team and get on that 53 coming out of camp. I think he's going to have to bust his ass and earn a spot on, special teams. I think that's the path for him. But I think sticking here is the key. Because if he could get on the roster and stay in the building and continue to develop, I think he has, we go back to what we saw out of him at Penn State when he was at his best. He has the talent to grow and develop and show an NFL coach staff, hey, look, I might have fallen off a little bit in 2023, but I'm working my way back. I'm honing my skills, and I'm getting back to being that level of player that had a lot of people thinking that he could be a first-round pick. So, I think that Green Bay might not necessarily be the best situation in terms of scheme fit because, is he an outside guy? Is he an inside guy? Is he a safety for Green Bay, as we just talked about? If he is, that's tough because the Packers give a lot of one-high looks. Caleb would probably be better off in a two-high look where it's just more opportunity to get onto the field. But it is what it is in terms of fit. It could be better, but it definitely could be worse. So I'm looking forward to see what he can do in year one because I think that, and we go back to the psychological side of it, I do think this is going to be a pretty big motivator for him. I just get that feeling that he's going to show up and he's going to go to work and he's going to try and prove something. Hey, look, I'm here. I've still got this talent, and I'm going to make it work no matter the situation.
Right now, I think nationally and probably plenty of Penn State football fans feel like they have his football narrative figured out. Former top recruit, was a hotshot player, then fall from grace and faded into football oblivion. Well, he's only 21 years old. He's on an NFL roster. He's a rookie. He's a draft pick. Go get after it. And I think knowing what we know about Kalen King, and I'd imagine what this experience has done to him, there's got to be some motivation factors coming from that. You want to talk about motivating factor? Curtis Jacobs went undrafted, was not selected in the 7 rounds. He was picked up by the Kansas City Chiefs, joining Hunter Norzad in that rookie class. I think we were all pretty surprised that he did not hear his name called. We all had him projected. I'd imagine that was probably an on average around round 5, early round 6 from our 4 picks together. Mark, he finds a home with the Chiefs as an undrafted free agent. So he did have the opportunity, him and his agent, to field some opportunities to figure out what maybe made sense. He joins that bandwagon again, going for a 3rd straight Super Bowl championship. And then the local guy, Keaton Ellis, he told us at Pro Day he was ready to spread his wings. Phenomenal player at State College, high school. We got to see some of those games alongside James Franklin back in the day when he was recruiting him out of State College High. Goes from a starting safety in 2022 to a backup safety in 2023, but maintained his team captaincy throughout. And so, Mark, a couple guys here that we've talked about on the podcast, haven't been shy about. We've enjoyed covering their careers to this point. Both have to do it as undrafted free agents. We figured that would be the case for Keaton. He's going to have to down in Nashville with the Tennessee Titans. But we thought that Curtis was going to hear his name called. So, again, psychologically, he's going to have to get through this fact that he was not a drafted player and get after it on a team that just won the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, I think, but even when we were making the predictions about Curtis, I think all of us or most of us mentioned, one of his real paths to the NFL was going to be as a core special teams guy.
Yes.
And that obviously doesn't change. And I think it's the same thing with Keaton Ellis. Keaton, he ran 4.43 at Pro Day and had a 39-inch vertical and a 10.9 broad. So his measurables were good. And I just don't, I guess maybe his tape wasn't what people wanted to see, and the fact that he didn't see nearly as many snaps this year as he did previously. But I mean, you could see somebody, kind of with his measurements and that speed and stuff, being a core special teams guy. That's not the easiest thing to do, to make a team like that. There's usually only a couple of roster spots, maybe one, sometimes. But listen, you have that opportunity. And the other thing that I think we have to remember is just getting into a camp is a good thing, because even if you don't stick with that team, you're going to be, other people are going to see you. Tape will get around, and maybe you'll get another opportunity. But I think both of those guys are pure class acts. We know the way they carry themselves. You had a chance to talk to Keaton. And one thing I wanted to mention, Tyler, about when you were asking Kalen King some of those questions, you asked those questions like a professional. I mean, you're not asking those like gotcha questions like some people might do. And he answered them like a professional.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same thing with Keaton Ellis. I mean, this is a guy who's been a team first guy, changed positions multiple times, named a team captain, is not a starter, doesn't sulk, does what he has to do. Does that mean you're going to be a good NFL player? Not necessarily, but it's one of those things that works in your favor. Maybe if they're trying to figure between multiple players, maybe that keeps you in camp, an extra little while. Maybe that gives you the benefit of the doubt. And I think he and Curtis Jacobs are both that kind of player.
Yeah, they're both built to go chase a special teams job. They'll see if they can go get that, and then from there try to build off it. Both of them former top 24/7 prospects. Curtis Jacobs, a 5-star by our site evaluation, and then Keaton Ellis, a 4-star prospect. And then when we look at who wasn't picked, I'm sorry, one more name to get to here. Trey Potts, by the way, him and Keaton Ellis spent a bunch of this winter getting together like 5-6 days a week in Huluba Hall around facilities, just trying to train, work their way toward pro day. We know Keaton Ellis has a foot in the door with the Tennessee Titans. We're going to see if Trey Potts can knock down that door as well. Once again, with the Kansas City Chiefs, who already have Hunter Norzad and Curtis Jacobs in their rookie class. Trey Potts has an invitation to try out at minicamp with the Chiefs. So we know that Andy Reid has found running backs of all different kinds of shapes and sizes from all different kinds of levels of football over the years with the Eagles, the Chiefs. He's found some really impressive gadget players that don't come from really heralded backgrounds. So I actually really think it's an intriguing opportunity if Trey Potts does indeed get a chance to stick with the Chiefs for a little longer beyond minicamp. But the two names that have not found homes as of this recording, Alex Felkins at the kicker position, not much of a surprise there. We'll see how that specialist market develops, especially as maybe some injuries happen into training camps. The other one, though, which is just remarkable to think of as we sit here on the final day of April, is Johnny Dixon, a guy that I think that we were really discussing in the day 2 kind of realm last fall when we were discussing what this defense was accomplishing and what Johnny Dixon's role was with the defense. And, that he had perfect film? Absolutely not. But what appears to be magnified here is his injury issue. He was not able to compete during the second half of action at Senior Bowl. He was there early on, got injured, didn't compete and did not participate at Pro Day at Penn State. And before that, didn't compete or participate at Combine. He was in attendance for both of those events, but he came into the Huluba Hall for Pro Day on crutches. He didn't seem to be depending upon them, but some red flags raised when you're working your way toward the draft and there's an injury concern. And another guy who opted out of the Peach Bowl, and that was early. He wasn't with the team for December like those other guys, many of those other guys were. And so it's been a while since we've really had a chance to speak with Johnny Dixon or kind of see him do much of anything on a football field, Mark. And I guess before we move forward, just your feedback here. And we hope that by the time you hear this podcast, Johnny Dixon has a home and he has a roster spot somewhere in the NFL. But as of now, Mark, we're looking at going into May and Johnny Dixon being an undrafted free agent.
We have the story ready and loaded to go. All he has to do is sign with the team. This is one that's tough for me, but I think it's not as tricky as the Kalen King because he gets hurt at the Senior Bowl. And then, we see him on crutches going into pro day. And he was walking in with all the NFL scouts. And then he told us he was off crutches, which he clearly was not off crutches. He was still on crutches. And he told us thought he was 2 or 3 weeks out. And it's like, yeah, I don't quite know about that. So I think obviously there were some more serious concerns. I was sort of hoping that, we saw what happened with Parker Washington last year, where, he was unable to work out and somebody still still liked what they saw and took a chance on him. Just didn't happen with Johnny Dixon. I mean, I think he was my MVP, my defensive MVP. One of us picked him as a defensive MVP just because in my thought, he did so many things so well. It's amazing to think that he played 3 years at Penn State and OA also played 3 years, and Johnny Dixon had more sacks, 7.5 to 7. I mean, that just spoke to all the things he did. 5.5 tackles for loss last year, 4.5 sacks, led the nation in sacks as a DB 2 straight years. And I just think, again, that's not the measuring stick. Like, people aren't saying, oh, this guy's tremendous as a sack artist, but I think it spoke to his ability to do a lot of different things and his versatility. And that's why I think we all thought somebody was going to take a chance on him. But yeah, definitely a head scratcher, maybe not to the level of Kalen King. And he was a person that I didn't think it was smart for him to opt out of the bowl game. I mean, because I don't think that I thought Kalen King was viewed as being a better prospect, obviously, just maybe slightly so. But I thought there were still some things Johnny Dixon could have done. And, I think it speaks to you only have so many opportunities. And he couldn't have envisioned getting banged up at the Senior Bowl, but you just never know. So unless you're absolutely going to be a 1st or 2nd round pick, I don't know why you would opt out of playing in another opportunity against the top 10, top 15 team.
We don't know, and I don't know if we ever will know what Johnny Dixon was hearing from NFL feedback regarding his draft status at the end of November and early December, when these guys are really huddling up, trying to determine what their next steps are going to be. But surely this was not the forecast. And again, we hope that Dixon finds a home.
Was he at the bowl? Did he show?
He was not at the bowl. He was not. No,
but I remember even last year at the Rose Bowl, even though Joey Porter Jr. had taken off and was working out on his own, he still showed up.
Chop Robinson was with the team down in Atlanta.
Yeah, so
I don't want to like make that seem like it adds layers to, but this is kind of
but it was odd that he just disappeared after the season ended, right? Is that fair?
Yeah, it's fair to say this one's shrouded in mystery for a few reasons, and we never really got. And I guess it could have come up in spring if we really wanted to ask it, but we never really got James Franklin's final thoughts on Johnny Dixon's career, right? We basically just got to ask James down in Atlanta, is Johnny Dixon with the team? No, he's not. Period. And so we never really got like we heard from James Franklin a lot of the other guys and kind of some finality to it. And so kind of matched that up with his absence. And he was in Haluba Hall. It's not like he's like, we don't want to make it seem like he's away from the program and there, but he was in Haluba Hall for pro day. He was supporting his teammates, not participating, but it's just a situation that, we don't know what's going on, and we don't know why. It was one thing to see him go undrafted, and you could probably understand maybe why that happens. And last year, Parker Washington fell into round 6 because of his situation after being very productive for Penn State. But it's another thing for it to now be the Tuesday after the draft, guys, and him to still not have signed with somebody. So it's just something to monitor there with Johnny Dixon, and we'll see what happens there. A guy who made a lot of big plays for Penn State during his career. All right, you guys want to talk a little bit about the 2025 draft now that we spent about 75 minutes breaking down this one, because there are some compelling storylines for Penn State. And as I kind of went through, it's that annual Monday and Tuesday after the NFL draft where we get the way too early mocks for the following class. And these things usually look pretty silly by the time you actually get to the end of the draft cycle and reach the draft. But it's always interesting to check out if you're like us and you kind of day by day are living, breathing, and sleeping college football. And when it comes to Penn State, Abdul Carter is certainly a consensus round 1 guy. He is the consensus round 1 guy right now for Penn State. He's a top 10 pick in 24/7 Sports early mock draft. He's number 4 there. He's a top 10 pick from the Athletics early 2025 mock draft. Among other major industry outlets, the Associated Press, Ralph Russo over there, he's the only one I saw put Drew Aller in their first round. I know there's a lot of mock drafts out there by a lot of different people in the mock draft industry, and it is a very far-ranging one. But I'm just sticking to some of the more established publications here and established reporters and established analysts. And the AP is the only one where you'll find Drew Aller based on the 6 or 7 that I saw. He's number 20 on that list. Denai Dennis Sutton, KJ Winston popped up on a couple different mock drafts, but Mr. Calvaruso, it's Abdul Carter surfacing early in that conversation, and he's a guy who hasn't even played that new position beyond the practice field just yet, except for that blue-white game, which gave us a little bit of a sense for how scary he can be coming off that edge full-time.
Yeah, I think everyone's just in love with the upside and the potential at this point, which is understandable because when you're talking about these way too early mock drafts, that's kind of the tendency across the board. You're not necessarily, well, I can't speak for what these guys are doing, how they're putting their mock drafts together, but I feel like a lot of people, they look at physical traits, they look at upside, they look at, room for growth, and that's kind of how they formulate these things. In some cases, maybe on-field production gets pushed to the side, but when it comes to Abdul Carter, there is no on-field production because he hasn't played the position yet. So I think that moving forward, this is obviously going to be a big year for him, improving himself at the position and, showing NFL scouts what he can do pretty much on a weekly basis, every snap that he's on the field. But he's just got, based on the physical traits, the athleticism, what a lot of people think he can accomplish as an edge rusher. He's got a future first rounder he's got it written all over him. And I think it's kind of a matter of how high can he climb throughout this 2024 college football season. That's what I'm going to be keeping an eye on really throughout the year. And as we keep an eye on these mock drafts, seeing how he fluctuates throughout the year. Some of that's going to have to do with Carter himself. The rest of that's going to have to do with how some other edge rushers around the nation fare, because there's some pretty intriguing prospects at the position in all these power conferences.
I went and fished up that quote that you referenced earlier, Mark, about Abdul Carter making the move to defensive end and what he said after the Blue-White game about it. Daniel Gallen had a piece up for this coming out of the Blue-White game. He said, quote, "This is a chance for me to do what I do best, which is get after the quarterback, play fast. Just do what I do best and get paid." So Carter's coming up on his junior season, as are a lot of the players in this conversation. That's the way it works. You're a third-year guy. You're in the conversation to be a mock draft. If you're only a second-year guy, you're not, because you can't get drafted the next year. So a lot of the guys we're going to discuss here, they'll have to actually go through, have big years, and then declare for the draft. Some of them may want to stick around for another year, like an Olu Fashanu situation. We don't know. But, again, this is the way too early aspect of it. And in that vein, Mark, we got a couple questions for our esteemed panel here on the podcast. And we begin by looking toward the 2025 NFL draft and saying straight up, who will be the first Penn State player picked? Starting with you, Brennan.
If I had to say the one who had the opportunity to go highest, it would be Aller, but I'm not going with Drew Aller. I am going to go with a little bit of curveball and say deny Dennis Sutton. This is a guy who was essentially a starter last year, even though he didn't start every game. He was in that key rotation, and I think if you have the snaps, it would reflect the number of plays that he's made. But he's listed at 6'5", 270. It's well known on this podcast that he's much taller than 6'5". He's probably closer to 6'7". Athletic. I just think those kinds of defensive ends that could do multiple different things and multiple different defenses are coveted at the next level. That's not a knock on Abdul. The reason I'm not going with Abdul is because I think there's going to be a level of adjustment that it's going to take him a little bit to get to where he needs to be. Denai's a guy who's been playing at a very high level for Penn State for multiple years now, and I expect him to be an absolute, just a stud player for them next year.
Because I'm a gentleman, I'm going to take this one last. Tyler Calvaruso, what do you have for us? The first player off the board for Penn State next draft, and just full disclosure, deny Dennis Sutton off the board. Whoever you pick will be off the board for me. No repeat picks here.
Oh man, you just screwed me over. I feel like I have to go with Abdul now, because I was going to preface it by saying I love the projection for Abdul as an edge rusher at the next level. I really do. Because I think once he puts it all together, and the reason why I think that I would be the first guy is because I think he's a little bit further along as a complete defensive end edge rusher type player at this point. But Carter's ceiling is undeniable. I mean, he has game record potential. So I think scouts are going to see that. I think they're going to turn on the film and they're going to see what he's doing out there. Like, whoa, we've got a lot to potentially work with here. So for me, it's got to be Abdul Carter.
The thing I wonder for me, and this will be through combine testing and whatever needs to be taken care of at the pro day, and we'll kind of figure out the athletic profiles. But does Abdul Carter maybe gain an edge, and no pun intended, but because of his ability to be a little more position versatile? And we see the way that this edge rusher role is developing at the NFL level and across football, but the way Chop Robinson could be used by the Miami Dolphins, the way Adiza Isaac could be used by the Baltimore Ravens. And sometimes you have a hard time figuring out, is it a defensive end? Is it a linebacker? I don't think that's going to be part of the quandary with denied Dennis Sutton. And though you may say you see a guy who can go inside in a 3-down kind of look and flourish in that role. So I just wonder if that versatility kind of maybe gives him a little bit of a boost in the conversation. But I think, once again, back-to-back years, they're going to be in a spot to produce multiple All-Big Ten defensive ends and multiple high-level NFL draft prospects at that position. And that's without us getting into other defensive ends, including a non-draft eligible guy who there's a lot of buzz about in sophomore, Nittany Lions. For my pick, I am going to go with Drew Aller. I took a long look at KJ Winston here, and I think he's such a dynamic presence at safety, and I think he's going to get a chance to prove it again with a lot of snaps on the defensive end this year. But to me, Drew Aller just has that prospect profile, and I was kind of shocked that he wasn't popping up in a lot of the mock drafts. I figured people maybe doing a little bit of surface level work, they might see the stats, 25 touchdown passes, 2 interceptions, see he was a former #1 overall quarterback prospect a couple of years ago and be like, this guy's going to go early. Now, Ralph Russo, who knows the landscape of college football as well as anybody, projects Aller at number 20 to the New York Jets, replacing ultimately whatever is left of Aaron Rodgers come next year. And so I think, to me, Drew Aller, if he is a first-round talent, I think there's a chance he goes much higher than that. Because I think and that maybe not a bold statement, but to me, if Drew Aller shows that he's going to be forecast as a first-round talent, he's going to be maybe a top 10 to 12 kind of guy because that prospect profile. I mean, how many unproven, unpolished, imperfect quarterback prospects do we see get picked, not just late in the first round, but like teams are trading up to get them halfway through the first round, like late in the top 10. You're seeing a run on quarterbacks regardless of what the class looks like, it feels like, on an annual basis. And then I start to look at what the quarterback class looks like for next year. And I was doing a little bit of digging on that, and you kind of work your way through it. You got a Shader Sanders out of Colorado's up there. Beck out of Georgia is a name that's up there. I think who else is on that? Quinn Ewers from Texas, of course, by way of Ohio State, is on that list. And you've got some people putting Jalen Milroe from Alabama in their first round projections.
Christian Veilleux.
No, not him. Just Veilleux, whatever his name is, wherever he lands. Don't see him popping up right now, Mark. But in terms of Drew, I just think that when teams, if he declared for the draft, and he's just the kind of prospect that I think the film's going to show what it shows, but teams are going to see what he could do in that pro day setting. We've already seen him do it once, look pretty good. But when the spotlight's really on him, and a lot of the intangibles and measurables, things you can measure too, that popped up with the reason why he was a 5-star recruit and why he was the #1 quarterback in the country here at 24/7 Sports, those are going to come into play again. The stuff that aren't going to be reflected in the box scores, the things that teams fall in love with through the draft process. I think a big step for Drew Aller this year is going to be a leader of the team, a leader of the offense. It's junior year. You've gone through some serious adversity. The guy who recruited you was fired. What does it look like now? I think that's probably a question that NFL teams want to see answered. Is he a guy that can carry that torch for the offense, carry that torch for the entire locker room, be a face of the franchise type quarterback? And I think he's got questions to answer, and he'll have opportunities to answer that in the year ahead. But to me, if it clicks with Andy Kotelnicki enough to encourage him to declare for the draft, and if it's even a first-round grade or a day 2 grade, because of what I think he'll be able to accomplish in an NFL combine setting, and because of what I think you do in a pro day setting, I think there's a lot of room for his ceiling to grow, whereas some guys may have to rely more on their film, more on their accomplishments at the college level, and then they're a little bit more, kind of status quo, or their stock dips a little bit as the draft moves forward. So I'll take my chance with Drew Aller here. I think he would have been, you look at these mock drafts, I think I saw a few of them last year that predicted 2 years out the 2025 draft, and he was on every one of those. And so was Cade Klubnik out of Clemson, who also, you're not seeing him on any of these lists. They were the top 2 quarterbacks in the 2021 class. Guys, moving forward, the one other question I wanted to get to on the subject is pro ready in terms of surefire talent in moving on to the NFL. So not necessarily the potential piece here, why a guy might be picked #1 or early on in the first round, but who's ready to going to be jump from that 2025 class to a roster and contribute right away. And Tyler, you got the first pick on this one.
There are a bunch of names I could pick from here. I'm just thinking about it. I feel like
you just had 15 minutes while Tyler was talking.
Yeah, but there's no easy answer here. I don't want, I got to make sure I'm on the ball when we look at this like a year from now. I'm going to go KJ Winston. I think that KJ Winston is at a point in his career where 2024 could really be the year for him in terms of blowing up in the NFL draft community. Because I think a lot of people are going to start to realize just how good of a defensive back he is. I think in terms of coverage, ball skills, just his overall skill set and what he brings to the back end of the secondary, I think it positions him well to be an early contributor at the next level. I just think he's a guy who could step into a secondary. I also think he has the mindset to step into a secondary as a rookie and be a guy right off the bat. He's not going to shy away from playing in the NFL and taking on a big role as a first-year guy. So I'd go with Winston as my pick. I was torn between him and Tyler Warren, but I'm going to go Winston here.
I also thought about Warren. I had Abdul Carter written first on my list, which I did to prepare for my answer here, Tyler Calvaruso. But I'm going to go with my #2 guy because Abdul, I think we covered enough ground on him. I'll go Katron Allen here. And, if we were in a different era of football, the names Nick Singleton and Katron Allen would be much more prevalent on these kind of mock drafts. But the running backs have a hard time, regardless of what they do at the college level, of sniffing the first round anymore. I mean, it's just, that's the real reality. Saquon Barkley as the number 2 overall pick is an extreme outlier. But I think in terms of a guy being able to take the jump to the next level and just be prepared to do his job, Kaytron Allen to me fits that bill. We saw him show up as a freshman, really change his physique, but remain kind of the same runner. The aggression was there. A little bit more burst was present from him. His first year on campus, 167 carries, 5.2 yards per pop. Second year on campus, the offense is going in all sorts of directions around him. Nick Singleton's having a really hard time getting going. What does he do? 172 carries, 5.2 yards per carry. I mean, he was the exact same guy, just a little bit more physically advanced in year 2. And I think in year 3, he's hoping to showcase his pass catching ability more. I think he's a really important piece for this offense as a pass protector as well, and being a bit of a bodyguard for his quarterback back there. That's something that translates to the league. I just think he's a complete running back, whereas maybe to this point, Nick Singleton's relied more upon the long runs in his career. To me, Kaytron Allen is somebody here at Penn State. When he gets his 17 carries, it works out well for him, and it works out well for Penn State. It keeps them on track. We haven't really seen what it looks like when he gets 25 to 30 carries, but let's be realistic about the NFL landscape. There's not a lot of running backs getting 25 to 30 carries. So I think Kaytron Allen could have to wait till maybe 3-4 other names come off the board for Penn State's class, because the running back position is what it is. But to me, when he does enter the league, whether it's 2025, as we anticipate, if he is healthy through his junior season or beyond, I think he's really built for what an NFL backfield needs. And I think he can have a lot of staying power in the league.
Yeah, I was going to go with Kaytron if you picked Tyler Warren. So I am going to go with Tyler Warren. You know, I have a lot of respect for Daniel Jeremiah of the NFL Network. I think he's as good as it gets in that business. And every time, whether it was pro day, the draft, whatever, whenever he talked about Theo Johnson, he always mentioned Tyler Warren or number 44. They have another tight end there at Penn State, and that's an objective observer. I don't think he has any, skin in the game, so to speak. But, if he's able to stay healthy, that's the only question mark about Tyler Warren, because athleticism, size, strength, leadership, all of those things, if he's healthy, I think he's a 10-year pro at least, that there's no question whatsoever. And I guess that the healthy part could come into play with anybody. But yeah, definitely Tyler Warren. I think Denai is another guy, but we already mentioned him. But for me, I would love to see my beloved Philadelphia Eagles get a guy like Tyler Warren, because I think he's going to be in the league for a long, long time.
Maybe we were fatigued from talking about him earlier, but I'm surprised no one picked Abdul Carr. I think he could definitely – I mean, he showed up here at Penn State in the summer of 2022, became a freshman All-American. The next year, he's a first-team All-Big Ten first-team All-Big Ten performer at linebacker, and now he's at defensive end. And from what we saw in the spring game, what we've heard about him, there's a lot of scary stuff happening. I don't think he's going to have much of an issue if it comes together for him on the field this year, putting it together again at the NFL level. Just to go through a list real quick, we don't need to talk about these guys because we can go on forever, but some other seniors to know in the conversation for next year's draft class, guys who are going to be out of eligibility: Devon Elise, Hakeem Beeman, Sal Wormley, Smith Vilbert in the trenches, the guy that there's some excitement about what he can maybe accomplish getting back involved. Then fifth-year seniors like Nick Dawkins, Amin Vanover, Zariah Fisher. We talked about Tyler Warren, Julian Fleming looking to maximize his final college year after 4 at Ohio State. Safety Jalen Reed is a guy who could really build his stock. He's going to have a huge role. Jalen Kimber, the cornerback who started last year for the Florida Gators. And then some other non-senior names to know other than like the Singleton and Allens of the world. Harrison Wallace, if the breakout does happen, he's a redshirt junior. So it may take advantage of that right away. Drew Shelton, when you look at the offensive line and some of the younger components who could be draft eligible, can he build off of his performance at left tackle and win that job and carry it forward? Vega Ioane is going to play a lot of football for them at guard. He'll be a redshirt sophomore. You got a junior Cam Miller at cornerback working to put himself in the starting lineup. Davian Collins is kind of an X factor here as a third-year guy who's made a lot of noise at cornerback. And then Mark wanted to make sure we mentioned punter Riley Thompson, who's a little bit older for his class. He's technically a junior at the college football level, but he's got some history back in Australia. And so, we'll keep tabs on him at the punter spot too. And we may have missed some names. We apologize to who we may have missed, but a lot of them could be in play when you talk about the 2025 NFL draft class. Let's finish with this. It's been a long episode, a lot of NFL draft prospect talk. but the transfer portal is closing today, Tuesday, April 30th. I thought this would be at the forefront of whatever podcast we would have on April 30th because I figured there'd be a ton of buzz about who was leaving and who was coming, but it has not been that. This 2-week span for Penn State football with the post-spring transfer portal had one predictable outcome. We knew Keandre Lambert-Smith was heading to the transfer portal by the end of spring ball. That happened. We had a team veteran leave. He was a key figure last year on special teams as a captain, but Malik Mega, not really a factor at wide receiver. He reaches the portal. And then more recently, something we haven't talked about on the show, but Davon Townley, former 4-star defensive line prospect, someone who came to campus as a defensive end, built up, bulked up to a defensive tackle, and along the way entered the transfer portal in December 2022 and came back on board in January of 2023. He's back in the portal. So now that we're caught up, that's really it. So Tyler Calvaruso, I'm going to throw it to you. There's 3 outgoing players. Again, we could see names surface beyond Tuesday as they get into the portal and register there. But there hasn't been an exodus, and we'll talk about that to finish the show in a minute as well, because it has to do with this part of it. The pursuits also haven't been out there. There hasn't been a lot of player targets to discuss. Is that going to change? If there's any names to know, who are they? And have you been surprised, generally speaking, about what this 2 weeks has looked like for Penn State in the college football transfer portal?
I think I'm surprised about the overall shape of the transfer portal across the landscape. There just haven't really been many fireworks anywhere in terms of, high impact guys really hitting the portal and deciding to find a new home. So, Penn State, we talked about it leading up to the opening of the second transfer portal window, the potential to go out and get a top flight wide receiver if one becomes available. One just hasn't really come available, not at that level. There's been, the staff has evaluated potential fits at the position, as it does every position, looking to upgrade. Wide receiver, some guys, it just hasn't really been there in terms of what Penn State wanted to add. It's just they wanted to get that top flight guy in here, and it hasn't really been there. I think, maybe moving forward, Zachary Franklin from Ole Miss is worth keeping an eye on. We're going to have to see if that goes beyond the initial stuff. But, right now, again, some guy, we could get off the air and some big-time names will hit the portal because that's just how it can go. But the current state of the portal and the current personnel in the portal, it's just, star power department's not really there. There's maybe some quality depth additions, but you always want to be careful about the depth additions you bring in, in terms of evaluating fit. You don't just want to add for the sake of adding. You want to make sure you bring in a guy who can really make an impact on your depth chart in 2024. So that's kind of where things stand. It's been very, very quiet. It's a very atypical transfer portal window.
Yeah, and just a couple of notes for the sake of clarity here. The portal does end on April 30th, but grad players, those who've earned the degree from their school, they can move on. They can move on at any point. So you could see a grad transfer hop in May and maybe rock the market a little bit. Just something to keep tabs on there. And then just because the portal closed on April 30th doesn't mean you can't get players out of the portal before May 30th. I know, or April 30th. Some people have confusion about that. Penn State can, if they decide that they want to target a guy who went in the last 2 weeks and they make the determination here in the coming days in May, they can do that. That player is available and they can set up visits and whatnot. But to this point, just not a long list of names that have been discussed and really that Penn State has presented major opportunities to through these 2 weeks. So, Mark, the thing about this, of course, is that we're not seeing Penn State deal with an exodus of too deep talent. Malik Mega, a guy that they really respected within this program, but not really going to impact offensive plans as we forecasted them. Same deal with Davon Townley on the defensive line. Now, Keandre Lambert-Smith is someone that we were frankly kind of surprised that we were still factoring in 2024 based on the way things finished out last year. Now we officially cross him off the list at receiver. So I think from an optics standpoint, they get through this and you see that they lost their leading receiver from 2023. Then they didn't bring anybody in on the other end. There's going to be some confusion about that. There's going to be some concern about that. But I think we also have to be aware of, and we've heard it behind the scenes, there's been starter level players for this team. There have been key backup level players for this team who have had maybe some encouragement to go test the waters, go sniff the market, go put their name out there and see what might be waiting for them. And Penn State's had the ability to counter some of those situations where they have not had those names pop up in the transfer portal. So I know I'm talking around the specifics a little bit there, but that's been a key kind of behind the curtain process here in the second half of April since spring practice closed shop.
Yeah, well, you're recruiting your own roster. I mean, and that's what I think people aren't. I completely get it, because you want to see the big, bang moment, like, oh my God, they landed this person. But I think it's equally important to acknowledge the lack of people that have gone into the portal from Penn State. Listen, I mean, as you mentioned, Keandre Lambert-Smith, frankly, we were surprised he was still with the team for most of the spring. I mean, I think that's fair to say, given the way things ended last year. And then with Townley and Mega, first of all, wish Lambert Smith all the best too, but with Mega and Townley, those guys weren't going to really factor in this year. Hopefully wherever they land, they're going to get the opportunity to play, and that could be an actual win-win. But I think only having that much, I think there's something to be said for that. We were talking a little bit before we started recording the show, and I equated it a little bit to, you look at some of these teams who really built their rosters on junior college transfers maybe 8 or 10 years ago, and they might have one good year, but it's very hard to sustain. So, yeah, you're not getting the flashy splash out of the portal here, but I think in terms of long-term viability, maintaining your own roster is just as important as going out and getting players. If you can go out and get somebody, great. We've seen it work to great effect for Penn State, right? with as we just were talking about the last couple of NFL drafts. But being able to maintain your roster, I think, has been really big. And if you're a Penn State fan, knock on wood for the next couple of days that nobody else pops into there. But as of now, it looks like they're in pretty good shape.
Yeah, I wanted to at least include some conversation on the transfer portal as it comes to a close here on this episode. Not as much meat on the bone as I thought there would be as April comes to a close. But guys, appreciate the perspective on the 24 draft class, the 25 draft class, and a little bit here to finish on the portal. A bit of a marathon episode, but we had a ton to catch up on. Daniel Gallen will be back to help do some heavy lifting when we get back together for another episode later this week. And Mark will send you off to Jamaica on a high note. Thanks for sitting with us. And Tyler Calvaruso, always appreciate you as well.
This was fun.
You sure we don't want to get into 26 class and see who might be?
We can push it to 2 hours.
Jamin Williams, man, I think I would.
Not yet. But Tyler, I think Calvaruso's got some 2029 recruits to go hunt down for interviews. So I'll let you guys get through it.
All right, see you guys.
Great stuff from my colleagues at Lions247.com and Tyler Calvaruso and Mark Brennan. You can catch our coverage every day of the week over at Lions247.com. We'll be back with another episode of this show in the next couple of days. We hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, make sure you're liking and subscribing to our episodes as they come out, wherever you find your podcast, and every episode available via video on YouTube. For now, on behalf of all the guys and our Lions 24/7 community, I am Tyler Donahue, wishing everyone well.